Several people have mailed me recently, sharing that they're questioning their own religious beliefs. Some are feeling hollow, some are frustrated, some are feeling fearful and isolated. Others are feeling cold and logical, approaching things analytically. Reading their different stories, I'm prompted to share my own transition to atheism with them, and whoever else is interested, taking into account both the emotional and the cognitive components of that switch. So here are 2 videos, each addressing one of those aspects, and using psychological models as frameworks to contextualize the psychological events involved. In this video, I'm going to explore the cognitive side of my transition from Christian to atheist, using a concept from person-centered theory called congruence. In person-centered theory, the self is sometimes represented in 2 components, experience and something called self-structure. Experience refers to the bald data we gather through our 5 senses and from internal and visceral sensations. Now, there's clearly a bewildering volume of data available to the senses. Person-centered theory suggests we have to find ways of processing this data into manageable, meaningful chunks and patterns, and that we do this through our self-structure. This term refers to mechanisms we use to categorize and organize our experiences, to give our world structure, drawing on beliefs, associations, values, reasoning. For simplicity, in this video, I'm going to call this component beliefs. Person-centered theory suggests that we instinctively strive to understand the world, to integrate our beliefs about the world with our sensory experience of it. And this overlapping area is called congruence. A lot of our early organisation of the world comes through naming experiences in the world. Fork, water, blue, chair. Lots of these are essentially neutral. Others will take on emotional associations. When we get burned by fire, our senses register pain. But not all associations are based on our own experience. As a child, I learned, for instance, that some parts of the human body were rude, even bad. Did my senses tell me this? No, other people did. But why would I take on other people's meanings and definitions when it wasn't my own experience? Person-centered theory uses the term conditions of worth to describe the environment in which the child learns the behaviours and attitudes that get rewarded with approval and love, and the ones that will be punished with disapproval and rejection. To fit in and maintain the approval so essential to its survival, the child takes on the views of its guardians, not just as opinions, but as absolute truths. In doing so, the child moves away from its own authentic, congruent experience. And as the child moves out of congruence, mismatches arise between experience and belief. Person-centered theory describes 2 kinds of mismatch, denial and distortion. These are probably best illustrated with stereotypes. John's been taught that all gay men are effeminate. This isn't based on reality, but it will now dictate his mental reality in the following way. Only effeminate men will get through that stereotype filter. John has no concept for masculine gay men, so when they come along, he simply fails to register them in his awareness. This is denial. But what if a masculine man openly announces he's gay? This is a more direct challenge to John's stereotype, one he can't ignore. So instead, he twists reality to fit the stereotype. This is distortion. Hence, John's false stereotype continues to feel true to him. How does this all relate to my religious upbringing and conversion to atheism? Well, as a child, I was taught God existed. I accepted it as truth because others told me it was true. It wasn't based on any kind of reality accessible to my own senses. But it created filters, just like John's gay stereotype, that would then profoundly affect what information I was able to let in. Solid scientific facts that conflicted with my beliefs were now denied or distorted. People were distorted. I was distorted. As this distorted framework of belief built up, I learnt to hold incredible moral dissonances in my head, so that human morality was completely flipped on its head when it came to God, who performed the most appalling acts, punishing all mankind for the sins of 2 individuals, drowning the entire population of the planet except for Noah and the contents of his ark, condemning his children to eternal torture in hell. It all made sense. And even where it didn't, I learned very early on that it was wrong to say so. This dangerous sounding word, blasphemy, would be used if I did, and would instantly stop all discussion. Ironically, what loosened the grip of these non-indigenous beliefs I was defending was when I first attempted to prove them. A religious education teacher had challenged me to explain why I believed what I believed. I talk about this experience at greater length in the accompanying video, Transition to Atheism. But basically, when I couldn't come up with any good answers, I asked the other Christians in my life. I knew the answers had to be good, and that God moves in mysterious ways and other such ideas weren't going to impress my teacher. So, for the first time, I pressed a lot harder with my questions, and was far more discriminating about the answers. I was convinced my fellow Christians would be able to supply the answers, and I was stunned to find they couldn't. Having never experienced God myself, my entire belief hinged on the fact that other people had. But suddenly I saw how easy it was to explain away the things that they were giving as proof of God. Things like a sick person getting better after prayer. Well, some sick people get better, some don't. What about the ones who don't? It's just their time to go to heaven. So for people who do get better, it's not their time to go to heaven. That's right. So if it's already predetermined whether it's your time or not, why pray at all? And why claim that it was prayer that made them better? The critical thinking I permitted myself in order to get the most convincing defences of Christianity I could allowed me instead to see the truth, that I was just following people who were following other people, who were following other people, and so on, until who knew when. None of us trusting in our own authentic sensory experience, but instead trusting in the distortions implanted in us as children. As my distortions collapsed, I was able to let reality in. I was able to see that it's never wrong to demand good, solid answers to questions about anything you're asked to believe. And if the responses to those good, solid questions are threatening or dissuading in any way, something's wrong, and we should be asking ourselves, what's so fragile that it can't stand up to sustained scrutiny and needs threats to protect it? Which seems the more likely candidate to you? I was able to see that the concept of hell is a child's concept of punishment. That childlike fear of all-engulfing, unimaginable consequences for doing something wrong. When we grow up, we realise parents aren't actually into inflicting unimaginable consequences on their children, for anything. And if someone does want to torture their children, we call them a psychopath. End of. It's perhaps religion's greatest coup that it's managed to drive such an efficient wedge between a person's own senses and their beliefs. Since my shift back to greater congruence, I've had many theists and supernaturalists approach to challenge me, each with their distinct brand of beliefs, but all, so far, with one standout aspect in common: the requirement that I deny my own authentic experience. This is in sharp contrast to science, which has no need to do this. In fact, it encourages the opposite. It values the accessibility of information to everyone to investigate for themselves using their own senses. I actually have no inherent loyalty to the idea of there being a God or not being a God. God suddenly pops up, makes an appearance, then believe me, I'll believe. My loyalty is to reality, to reliable evidence, to what is available through whatever means to my senses. That's what makes me an atheist, nothing else. Yeah, I know all the stereotypes. All atheists are anti-God, anti-society, rebellious, immoral, and I believe I've covered stereotypes already. My atheism is purely about a demand for evidence. And those who scorn demands for evidence, by the way, who scorn skepticism, are being completely disingenuous. If someone came along claiming to be the second coming, is anyone out there really trying to say they'd just uncritically accept that? They wouldn't be at all skeptical? I find it hilarious just how fanatically skeptical some anti-skeptics get in trying to tear down the solid science that opposes their supernatural beliefs. We all demand evidence, and that's a good thing. Reliable evidence is where the circles meet. Evidence could be seen as a congruence generator, but not when it's split like this. We all demand evidence for the things we find hard to believe. Let's go one step further. Demand evidence for the things we find easy to believe. And let's pass on to our children the very best of our knowledge, not the very worst of our unexamined dogmas.